Hello everyone, my name is Brianna Messer and this is my capstone video project. Today I will be sharing with you the life, work, and legacy of Vincent van Gogh, but more specifically the influences on his art. Most people associate the name Van Gogh with mental illness. Part 1. Life before the art. Vincent was born to Theodorus and Anna van Gogh on March 30th, 1853 in Zundert, Netherlands. Tragically, he was born exactly 1 year after the birth and death of Theodorus and Anna's first son, also carrying the name Vincent. Sadness was prominent throughout Vincent's childhood, as he feared that he would never amount to the greatness that the first Vincent could have. He was first introduced to art when he began working at his uncle's art. Things seemed to be turning up for Vincent until he was transferred to the London branch at age 20. Here he fell in love with his landlady's daughter, and after she rejected his proposal, he became unhinged. This marked Vincent's first episode of periods of relative happiness, but brought abruptly to an end by an emotional crisis that plunged him deep into despair. After this, he transferred to a different branch and was eventually fired for having poor relations with customers. For some time after working at his uncle's art dealership, he was a book salesman and a teacher, but failed at those as well. He also aimed. Part 2. Art, Influences, and Death. While Vincent was dismayed from the dismissal, this allowed him to find his true passion. In 1880, his brother Theo encouraged him to enroll in an art school located in Brussels. Although Van Gogh did not like the rigid syllabus and precepts of the teachers, so he chose to move to the Hague to pursue his dreams. During this time, he expanded his knowledge of watercolors and sketching, but also fell again for the wrong woman. He fell in love with an alcoholic prostitute named Cien, who is pictured in many of his paintings. His time with Cien inspired the picture Sorrow, which depicts a naked pregnant woman with her arms on her knees, holding the appearance that she is uncared for, which is exactly the way Van Gogh found Cien. After the ending of their relationship, Vincent moved to Noonan, where he began to expand his mediums and style. Van Gogh again found inspiration in the local peasants, but chose. While Van Gogh was inspired by the Impressionists with their dreamy palettes and landscapes, their style did not capture the intensity with which Van Gogh experienced the colors of the world. It wasn't until Vincent went to Paris and met the Post-Impressionists that he was able to find others with the same artistic goals as himself. Shortly after arriving in Paris, he met fellow Impressionist artist Paul Gauguin, and they became friends almost instantaneously. He found inspiration in the Post-Impressionists in Paris and how they distorted the shapes and colors of their pictures in order to convey their own emotional response to the world. The influences and teachings that Vincent acquired in Paris led to the creation of his personal idiom and style of brushwork. These new strong influences are evident in his painting Montmartre, Windmills, and Allotments, in which he does share the dreamy palettes and landscapes of the Impressionists, but changes up the brushwork to where it shows more of his most post-Impressionist. After studying European art, he became intrigued by the Japanese. Van Gogh believed that European art could reinvigorate itself by learning from the powerful simplicity of the images. He dabbled in Japanese art throughout his career and used the influence of bright and contrary colors in many of his works. Van Gogh copied Japanese art, offering his own unique touch. These influences can be seen in Japanese air, Flowering Plum Tree after Hiroshige, in which he added a frame and more blossoms but kept to the original style of Hiroshige. This Japanese style is also a. It was in this time that Van Gogh lived a life of celerity. In one of his letters to Theo, he reminisced that many days would pass without him even saying a word to anyone except to order supper. During this time, Vincent's mental health continued to decline, him often spending money on paint rather than food. It was also rumored during this time that Vincent was eating paint, specifically yellow paint, because in a letter to his brother Theo, Vincent described the night cafe as a place where you can ruin yourself, go mad, and commit crimes. Vincent used the colors red and green in an attempt to express the terrible human passions of the cafe goers. The dark emotions that are prevalent in this painting only became more potent in the days to come. Van Gogh was excited when he heard word that Paul Gauguin would be joining him in the Yellow House in Arles, France. Paul Gauguin stayed there for almost 6 months while the two worked on paintings and lived harmoniously. Although Van Gogh could not handle the slightest criticism from Gauguin, and they began to fight regularly. These fights escalated and on December 24th, 1888, after a large fight, Van Gogh severed his own ear. As Van Gogh took the ear to a local prostitute as a gift, Paul Gauguin had left to go back to Paris, leaving Vincent in the Yellow House alone, once again. After this episode, the locals of Arles banded together and signed a petition demanding that he be taken to an asylum. After this, Vincent became a patient willingly in the asylum at Saint Remy de Provence. Pictured above is the small room that Van Gogh stayed in during his time at Saint Remy. The room was only big enough for him to paint and sleep in. Although this tiny space and Van Gogh's mental illness did not stop him from creating some of his most famous works during his stay at the asylum. His most famous work that he completed during this time was The Starry Night, which is arguably one of the most famous paintings to ever exist. The influence came from the small window to the left of Vincent's bed, where he would look out during the day and then paint as he envisioned the night. The diagnosis for Vincent's mental illness is one that has baffled psychologists around the world. In fact, over 150 psychiatrists have attempted to label his illness, and some 30 diagnoses have been suggested. These include schizophrenia, bipolar, syphilis. Since the rise of Van Gogh's fame, many have wondered why the artist chose to use yellow in almost all of his paintings. Many doctors believe that this was more than a fascination with the color and may be caused by a preceding mental or physical illness. In Van Gogh's most famous works, such as the previously mentioned Starry Night, there are distinct Van Gogh spent almost an entire year at Saint Remy, but then Theo arranged for him to receive treatment from Dr. Gachet in Anvers. Gachet was an artist himself and they became quick friends. Van Gogh even claimed that he had found himself a true friend in Dr. Gachet, something like a brother, and that they resembled each other physically and mentally. During his short time in Anvers, his brushwork became broader and more expressive, and the vision of his nature more lyrical. During this phase, the subjects and landscapes appear to be moving and living. These influences are apparent in Town Hall and Garden d'Aubigny. Vincent began the day as usual, grabbing breakfast and heading out to find somewhere to paint. Part 3: Life After Death. Van Gogh's life did not end here, though, for after his death, his sister-in-law Joanna made it her life's mission to ensure Vincent got the recognition he deserved. Due to the thickness of the paint, when Van Gogh died, some of his paintings were still drying, and Joanna would not let them die with Vincent. Unfortunately, 6 months after Vincent's tragic death, Joanna also lost her husband as well, Vincent's brother Theo. This painting is known as the Red Vineyard. A few months after Vincent's death, Joanna began to show his art to dealers around Europe. She ended up selling both of the irises and the three sunflowers painting to Octave Mirabeau, all for some mere 600 francs. Many buyers quickly became fascinated with the uniqueness of his art, and collectors began to emerge. In 1908, art collector Helen Kroller Mueller became fascinated with Vincent's art, often buying 5 or 10 at a time. The Muellers eventually purchased over 91 Van Goghs, which became the centerpiece of the museum they opened. More collectors followed suit, and in 1924, when the British Portrait Gallery was allocated funds to purchase modern Van Gogh's art is now spread all around the entire globe, resting in over 200 museums. Since his death, Van Gogh has become one of the most loved and intriguing artists that has ever lived. In November 2017, one of his paintings sold for a whopping $81.3 million at auction, making it one of the top-grossing paintings of all time. In late 2017, an animated film named Loving Vincent was released in his honor. This film consisted of over 65,000 frames as individual oil-on-canvas paintings that gave the illusion of his work coming to life. This tribute was loved by audiences around the world and grossed over $20 million in 3 months, and was also nominated for an Oscar. Many other films and books have been written in an attempt to document Vincent's fascinating life. His legacy does not lie in the numbers, though, but in the art itself. Vincent's art exerted a powerful influence on the development of much modern painting. This emotion is one of the reasons he is considered a father of Expressionism. He expressed his emotions through the use of immediately recognizable heavy and sculptural line. Instead of trying to make a realistic copy of his subjects, he chose to use arbitrary color to express himself forcibly, in order to exaggerate the essential and leave the obvious vague. This unprecedented approach to painting inspired artists for generations to come, but particularly influenced the French Expressionists, also known as the Fauves. His artistic style was a powerful alternative to the avant-garde centrality of delicate Parisian Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. He was so popular to these young artists because of his use of arbitrary color, use of space, heavy line, brushstroke, pattern, and particularly the stylized distortion of exaggeration of reality. Some of these influenced great painters such as Henri Matisse and Vlaminck, whose influence is audible of Van Gogh's with their paintings Interior of an Etruscan Vase and Champs de Blé and Restaurant de Vogel. His influence did not. Since his death and Joanna's first sale, his fame has never stopped growing. Many believe the allure can be contributed to the mad artist stereotype and the fact that he was a struggling genius during his lifetime. When looking at Van Gogh's art, we should not dwell on the idea that he was a mad artist, but instead concentrate on a profound talent tempered by a prodigious, exhausting, and ultimately debilitating creative effort. Many artists have the skill to be a portraitist or landscapist, as Van Gogh was, but not many. In a heartbreaking letter to his brother Theo, Van Gogh wrote, "What am I, in most people's eyes? A nonentity, or an eccentric and disagreeable man. I would like to show by my work what this nobody has in his heart." Tragically, Vincent van Gogh died believing he was a nobody and that he never made his mark on the world. If only he knew that he now stands as one of the most influential and beloved artists of all time.